right, so today we're going to be doing a lesson on this amazing book called The Color Monster, and it's The Color Monster, a story about emotions, written by and illustrated by Anna Lenas. So, looking at this cover, just look at the details that you can see in her illustrations. Almost looks like cutout prints, right? Like they're cut out, they were drawn on. Maybe the detail, you can see all the texture strokes in here. Not every area is completely filled in. And that's okay. It tells a story on its own, doesn't it? And each monster is a different color. Let's find out what this story is about. This is the Color Monster. Today he woke up feeling confused, and he doesn't know why. Are you mixed up again, Color Monster? Your emotions don't work well when they're all jumbled up. Look at all these textures and patterns and pieces of paper, cardboard, or ones with holes that you see on here. You should try to separate them and put each one in its own jar. If you'd like, I can help you. Let's try to make sense of how you feel. Sometimes pictures tell a story on their own, don't they? This is happiness. It shines yellow like the sun and twinkles like the stars. Look at that color, yellow. Also look at some of the shapes, pieces of paper and cardboard and things that are cut out. How does that color and the textures and the shapes and the cuts make you feel? When you're happy, you laugh and jump and dance and play. You want to share your happiness with everyone. This is sadness. It is lonely and blue like a rainy day. It washes over you like the sea. When you're sad, you want to hide and want to be alone. You don't want to do anything except maybe cry. It's okay to cry, Color Monster. There he is. This is anger. It burns red like a fire, and it is hard to stamp out. When you're angry, life can feel unfair. Have you ever felt red or anger before? Sometimes when you want to take out your anger on others, but I'll be nice to you, Color Monster, and your anger will disappear. Just look at this, the texture, the color, the splash, and the marks. Sure does look like anger, doesn't it? This is fear. It hides and runs away like a mouse in the night. When you're afraid, you feel tiny. You think you don't have the courage to face the gray shadows, but I can help you find your way. This is calm. It is quiet like the trees. It is light as green leaves swaying in the wind. I like all those calm. When you're calm, you breathe slowly and deeply. You feel at peace. Now you can rest, Color Monster. All your feelings are in the right place. See, don't you feel much better? You can see here's sadness with his jar, anger with his jar, fear, calm, and happy. Uh-oh, I see you're feeling something new. You look different, Color Monster. Tell me, how do you feel now? What do you think Color Monster feels? To my family and friends, to all the colors living together. So let's take what we just read about today and let's start feeling how we're feeling. And we're going to put our colors into jars and then make up our own color monsters. On a piece of paper or in your journal, your art sketchbook, I would like you to play around with some of the different color monster feelings. This is an activity that we're really focusing on. How are you feeling? Are you feeling all jumbled up today? So before you start, I want you to play around with the monster. And if you don't have a monster in your sketchbook, you could either, 1, quickly draw it, or 2, you can just do a bunch of different scribbles of colors that you're feeling. So when you look here, you've got happiness, sadness, anger, fear, and calm. These were the ones that were shown in the book. And then you also had pink. But you had to figure out, what did you think the pink meant for the monster, right? Or you. So think about today, what are 6 different feelings that you're feeling? Or start with 5 in here. Just coloring. Scribble. Get it out. Kind of pick the colors that you're feeling. Doesn't even really quite matter. So, grab whatever you're feeling. If you've got the yellow, whatever colors you've got in front of you, and just kind of go for it. Let it loose. How does everything feel? What colors do you think you look like inside of your color monster? Now that you've finished coloring in for the past few minutes, look at what you came up with. How does it resemble you today? I'm looking at some of my colors that I put in here. I did some different patterns or designs, and, just looking at the fear and anxiety piece. You may not know that about me, or you do know it about me, but I do have a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress and different things always going through my head, and I feel like it zaps out of me, or it's like constantly pricking me or coming out of me and bursting in these kind of electrical waves. So look at that, and now what I want you to do is to take your time and try to put in, you could draw something. It doesn't have to be an exact color, but you could draw something. You could just put the color in, but just take a few minutes and take from what you drew and place it in. So happiness doesn't have to be yellow, and sadness doesn't have to be blue, or fear or calm or anger. Maybe you added a few more colors, and that's okay. You can blend them inside of your jars. And then we'll focus on our last one. So why don't you get started now? You've taken the time to just quickly and briefly take some of these emotions and feelings that you're feeling and placing them on inside of jars, or if you're in your sketchbook and you didn't want to draw a jar really quick, just having it inside of a box. So here, I did happiness, and there is no wrong way of doing this. And sometimes maybe happiness to you is purple. It's entirely up to you. So in here, I just kind of thought and put some words down to myself of, the drawing that I did and the swirls of the color for me radiates joy. So how does happiness look coming from you? And sadness, I marked it as it's usually really thick, and I feel like it's so sticky and it sticks on to me. And it's really hard to get off and to get that sadness out of me. But it's important, with each of these feelings as I go through it and how you go through it and look at yours, anger, it grows like fire. It's sharp. It can hurt others. It can hurt you, like when you're really angry, you just don't know how you're going to react or how others will react to you. And fear, it's like electric. It bursts and it's sharp as well, where sometimes it can make you feel like you can't catch your breath. And sometimes, it's just like you just don't know what to do and you feel lost. And finally, calm, look at yours. What does yours look like? For me, it's growth. It's green. It's new. It's like fresh cut grass and a summer breeze and sitting outside and just that calmness and taking in that quiet and listening to nature. So look at yours. And now that you've kind of removed some of those emotions out of your color monster, what's one other emotion you're feeling today that you just want to mark down? You don't need to share it with anybody. You could color it really quick, or you could just do a couple lines inside. But just know that every emotion you feel is normal, and it's okay. And it's okay to not be okay. So as you're doing this, just know that each of these, you have the power to be able to feel and understand your emotions so you can learn how to make yourself feel better. And now let's dive into our art lesson. Today we're going to be making Kudu-lah critters, and we're going to be basing it off of the book The Color Monster. So we're going to learn a little bit about our different emotions and feelings that we might have inside of us, and we're going to create our own jars and critters in the style of Kudu-lah. So let's take a little bit more of a look into what Kudu-lah critters are. Kudu-lah critters are created by a couple by the name of Jennifer and Kenny Kudulas. They started this in 2017 in Brooklyn, New York. So it's a husband and wife duo. Kenny's the one that draws the pictures, and Jennifer is the one that comes up with the names and the bios for them. They typically are found in mason jars, and they're based off of people that they came across or come across as they're going through New York City subways. Most of the other pictures that you'll see of the Kudu-lah critters are on top of pictures that the couple actually takes, and that's called juxtaposition. So we'll look a little bit more on their different creations by taking a look at their website. You can even see that on their website for Kudu-lah is they did a critters in Chicago for us. So when they were out here, you can see all the different ones like the L train, Windy City, etc. And here's the bean. So you can take in how they can collage their art pieces together. Website, as I just showed you, here are some of their critters. You can purchase them where they put it on the canvas and they stretch it out and put it on a wood block. On the back, they have the critter's name and also a story. For example, here is Kiwi, and it goes me, meep, meep, which translation says, I am a small bird, pick me up, let's play, I love you. So it really gives you all of these great little tidbits about the character and some of their stories. For example, here's also Catopus, and it says, whether it's slinking through an alley or swimming the seas, Catopus leaves no uncharted territories or hearts. Ever since Quadrupus laid eyes, 5 to be exact, on this saucy sea cat, he was smitten. Maybe this is why our bashful gal is always blushing. So there are actually 16 in this collection, and they do retire some of their critters. So that kind of makes them even more exciting when you have that. For our project today, let's look at what we need. The materials we're going to need is a 9 by 12 piece of paper, markers, a black crayon or a black colored pencil. I prefer to use that versus a pencil, but you can always trace over it once you're done. And then a paintbrush and some water. So looking at this, we are going to be creating our mason jar critters on some shelves based off of the book, our Color Monster, a book about feelings, and using our Kudu-lah characters. Looking at color as an emotion, as we're doing this, we practiced on our paper here of the Color Monster, how we felt, our different things in the jar. So we practiced with a few different colors and, based off of what we had for the book to simplify things. But looking at color as an emotion, you can see that color can be so many things, and different shades can mean completely different things. So the emotion of color, white could be simplicity, and blue could be wisdom as well as peace. Green could be balance and growth as well as nature. Yellow could also be really energetic and joy. But you could also have orange as bravery and confidence, and pink as sensitivity, red as strength and determination instead of anger, or hate. So there's so many different things the way you look at the colors. And sometimes color for what it means to one person could mean something entirely different to somebody else. So as you're going through this and you look at your classmates that are next to you, don't worry if they're using color in a different way than you are, because who you are is going to always be different than somebody else, and that's okay. For this part of our lesson, we're going to start with a 9 by 12 piece of paper. And then what we're going to do is you can use a ruler, you can also use the edge of another piece of paper, or even a folder that you have. So, and honestly, you don't even have to have your lines be very straight. So what we're going to do is I'm going to have us come up with drawing a couple different ledges or shelves. And your shelf could be, maybe it's a shelf that's on an ankle. It's going one way and then the other way. So it's, it doesn't have to be straight. It could be a knotted shelf. It could be a little bit of a wavier shelf. It's entirely up to you. If you want your shelves to be made up of Legos, they could be made up of Legos or a different type of wood or something else. So it's going to be a very basic, simple shelf that we're going to put our mason jars on of our emotions using the Kudu-lah critters. So it's going to be a mix mash of a few different things, but I was hoping that it would just be fun and something you might enjoy. I wanted to point out too is that if you do like this lesson as we make it, I also have another video lesson on making the Kudu-lah critters, but as a photobomb one. So here they're doing a photo booth, photobomb kind of strip, and you can make something like that too. We're also going to use markers similar to this one, and also just a wet paintbrush, and be able to spread and make the markers bleed. So the first step when we're creating this today is I want you to use a pencil or even a colored pencil. So right now I'm using a colored pencil, and you can also use a crayon. And all of that will be able to help us with our drawing part. All right, so let's begin by creating our awesome ledges. So I'm going to use my ruler, and I'm thinking, because my emotions are always like a roller coaster, I am going to draw mine in this sort of a direction. So play with how you want to put yours. So here's my basic outline of my shelves. And now I want to give it that ledge feel. So we're going to add in a little bit of a perspective here. I'm going to draw a straight line off of my shelves, just like this. And I'm going to angle it back up, like such. There we go. So here's my shelves. And then what I'm going to do is kind of on a slant. As you can see, I did a little bit of a slant here. And I'm going to do the same thing under here. I'm going to do a little bit of a slant. Okay. And you're going to be able to see the underside of our shelf. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to match. It's the same perpendicular line. And here's my awesome shelf. Same with this one. I'm going to kind of angle it up, perpendicular, and draw my line. So now I have the front and I have the underneath of my shelf. Very simple. And if it's hard to see on here, what I'm going to just do so you guys can see is I can just quickly add in a little bit of value. So I'm just using my colored pencil. And I'm just adding in a little bit of a value on this underside. So it just looks a little bit darker and easier to see. Fantastic. All right, so now we have our two shelves already here. The next thing I'm going to have us do is create our jars, because you can't really do much unless you have your jars made, right? So let's create our jars. The first thing that we're going to do is to do an oval. So we'll draw an oval. And then you're going to have two lines coming off of it. And we're going to make a curve to connect it. The next thing you're going to do is you can either have your jar come straight out, or I'm going to just do these two kind of angled out lines. And then I'm going to draw it straight down, like such. And I'm going to give it a little bit of a curve, because I want it to hide a little bit on this shelf here. Fantastic. All right, so then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw another one. Maybe this is a taller jar, and maybe with this jar, all you can see is part of it. And it's just a nice, big, wide jar, zoomed in. So I want you to take your time now and go through and add in 6 jars. This next part inside of our jars, what I would like us to try to do is add in some of these reflections. And I went ahead and I added in a couple little details here, and that'll just help us when we go to add in some shading to make it more realistic and fun as we do it. So depending on your jar, all you need to do is think about adding in a couple curved lines that are a little bit darker on the edges, and then you could have one in the middle-ish like this. So it's like 1, 2, 3 and a little here. And then on the lid, you're going to do a curve and just add in a couple little dots. After you've done this curve and a couple little dots, you're going to do another little bit of a curve on a lid on the left part, and then you can have in a few more lines. Now they're not straight lines, they're just lines that are following the same curve above it. So you see how it just gives it a little bit more texture and character. Then if you want to have some reflection, you can do where you follow a little bit of the line here, and you can also draw it's like a rectangular shape for having that shadow or reflection. And same thing, you're just kind of doing a couple little lines. So it's not much. You could even add a few, little tornado zigzags, and it just gives your jar a little more personality. We're also going to be putting our characters inside the jar. So what I recommend is waiting to put the bottom part. I can use a pencil really quick to show you. So if you're feeling like that's something that you want to try at this moment, there's just to help guide you of where to place. When we did our kindness hearts in the past, or kindness jars, is we had our lines or the bottom of the jar in here. So you can always go through if you're using a pencil, and you can kind of give yourself that guideline if you want to know where it's at. Maybe it's lower, maybe you don't see it exactly. But go through and add in some of the jar lines. You don't have to do the same for each of them. You can just kind of play around with, hey, where do I want these little marks to be? Is there a crack inside of it? Like is your monster going to be coming out of that one? So you can draw a crack kind of coming through. Or eventually, if you want to label your jars with a label or on the lid, you can do that too. All right. So take your time, go through and add in those different designs and marks on your jars, just so they look more realistic for you. Another little thing to go in and do is just to add in some texture on your shelf. So if you were doing it out of Legos or different things, you can. I just like to go in and add in some marks or lines that are just in different thicknesses and shapes. It just kind of adds in a little something for my wood. And all I'm doing is going left and right and following the direction. You can always go in and add in a knot or two, but just play. We have our jars made, we have our shelves put together. What we're going to do is going in using that colored pencil or your crayon. If you're feeling like you really just want to work with pencil first, that's fine, and then you can go over it with crayon as well too. Or colored pencil, is we're going to create our Kudu-lah critters. So think about your emotions. So when you're looking through this, we talked about happiness, we talked about sadness and anger and all those different things. When you look at his characters, maybe see which one speaks to you in that emotion. So play with your favorite ones first, because we could always go in and add color, but keep that in the back of your mind when you look at it. Which one resembles you when you look exhausted and stressed out and just fear, as that one had said. You can come up with your own words too. It doesn't have to be happy, sad. You could have something that is more focused on how you're feeling today, that maybe it wasn't fitting inside of that jar category. So play with drawing your characters right now inside of the jars. Think about, you could just have a little bit of a head peeking out. You could have the whole thing looking like it's trying to break out of the jar. It's up to you, but have fun as you're creating it. Now comes the fun part. Now we're going to go in, just like in the book, The Color Monster, and we're going to fill in our critters, our Kudu-lah critters that we either came up with our own or we elaborated or created and used from the Kudu-lah Critters website, so that way we could practice that style of art that they create. So on here, what we're going to be using are markers. They have to be washable markers. The reason we use the crayon or the colored pencil is because it's not washable. So as we go over it, you don't have to trace every single thing. That's what I did in my past one. For my other lesson is I used black colored pencil and a little bit of crayon in some areas, and then I just went over certain areas with marker and spread it with the water. So let's get started on that. Markers, you'll need a plastic bag, and then you'll also, you could use a regular paintbrush with a cup of water, or you could go in and use one of these awesome water brushes. And so how we use these is you don't want to squeeze water everywhere. So I usually just do a gentle squeeze, and you can see the water starting to come down. You always are forcing it down the brush. So here I had some droplets come out, as you can see. But now what I do is I usually just test it so I can see that my hand is wet and the brush is wet. The hair becomes really nice back on the brush. So let's think about some areas that I want to make work. This character in particular is usually like a purplish color, but for me, I was feeling it that I usually get this anxiety a little bit with, I don't know, this kind of look is how I feel. I feel frazzled, I feel just a little bit stressed out. So when I want to go in and add certain colors to it and the texture, I'm going to look back at the original that I was focused on, and I will think here on exactly some areas that I'm going to use my black. So he uses a lot of different black shadows inside his characters to really make it pop. Like the outside, the lining of it is, rather dark as well. So I'm going to have mine be a little bit more of a grayish one, a little one on top. So now, using my brush that's nice and wet, I'm going to spread this. I'm going to just make sure it's a little bit more wet because I let it sit there for a little bit. I'm going to spread the black on my paper. And you can see how it's turning this monster into this cool effect. All right, so now that I have this, what I'm also going to do is I want to color in some of my monster with a little bit of a purple hue. And what I'm going to do is get this area wet, and then I'm going to go in and I'm going to just kind of gently paint certain spots to bring in some of this purple tones of my monster. So it's a grayish purple monster or critter that's in here. So I'm going to use some of my black. You can mix colors on your baggie and go in and add in like a purplish black here. I'm very gentle when I'm using this brush because I don't want it to rip the paper by having too much. Okay, so here's my critter as I'm working on it. Another option is once this dries, I'm going to go back on and I'm going to really outline some of these areas and just make it pop. If you don't want to start with the marker right away and you want to jump in with going in and adding in some of that depth of the darkness on your characters, you can do that too. So looking at this, it's kind of what I was going ahead and doing, is looking at the kind of cat-like creature here. I'm going to make sure I darken using my colored pencil or a black crayon some of these other areas with nice thick lines, and that's going to make the marker and everything really show up nice too and give some of that value that you're looking for. So you'll see the difference as soon as I get to it here. So now look at this difference. Here I've got my one that has, I went in with the colored pencil and I just did the darkening. And here I used the marker to make the darkening. You can see how it's drastically different. Once your marker area is dry and you've tested it, you can go in and you can add in the value that way on top of it. Or you can start by doing this and adding in your color in there. So let me take a quick, I'll speed this up and you can see how this looks once I've added in that value, and you can decide which step or process works best for you. So now I've shown you two steps. You can either go in, I think my favorite one for me in particular is doing all of the color pencil dark work first and then just putting the watercolor marker version on here, because otherwise I feel like I'm leaving it unfinished as I work. And I'm one, for me at least, that likes to work and get it done and then move on to the next one. But some artists, and a lot of artists, is they do a layer one and then they go back and do layer two. So however you're feeling is how you can play with it. Your jars don't have to stay clear. You can also finish the jar itself as well. But you'll notice that my bag is really not wet. I'm using very little water. I barely touched any of the water that's inside of this because I don't want my paper dripping. So go ahead and fill in your jars. Focus on the feelings. You don't have to label it. You can just go with how you're feeling right now and putting each of those emotions into a jar with those characters that you created. And then go ahead and just add in some more things that make it feel like you. So here I went through and I added in all the details, like some darkening using my colored pencil. Like I said, a crayon could do the same thing, and a colored pencil, or really pushing with your regular pencil, just push nice and hard and dark. Typically the pencils that we use are all number 2s, but if you use a higher number or you have access to the different levels of pencils, I would go with a nice big soft 6 or like that, so that way you can get that nice deep shade. Now let's go in and add in those colors. All I did here at the end, as you can see, is I splattered on some paint and did a little bit of dots, but you can create whatever you're looking at and like. You can also go in with some extra details of some black marker, and once you're done, just turn it in on Google Classroom for me.